Okay, well, welcome everyone to our webinar From Symptoms to Solutions, Diagnosing Your Organization's Challenges. I'm Dr. Stephen Goodwin. I'm President and CEO of Turning West. We're an organization development and leadership consulting firm with clients all across North America and Europe. Our specialty is all around the sociology of organizational culture and how do people come together and form a missional organization to achieve great things in the world. And so we combine sociology, psychology, theology, sometimes even a little anthropology to try to help organizations succeed at their mission. I'm joined in this webinar today by my colleague, our managing consultant, Megan Sands. Megan, you want to say a word about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Sands. I am a consultant here at Turning West and have a master's in industrial organizational psychology. So really excited to talk about organization diagnosis with you all this morning.
Great. Thank you, Megan. So we'll start by telling you a story. So about a year ago, we had a $20 million or so nonprofit in the environmental education space call us. The board chair found us through calling all over the country. And when he finally connected with me, he was at his wit's end. He had one of the most talented boards I've ever seen. In fact, he himself had been CEO of a very large international firm with incredible experience. But their board was just frustrated, exasperated by the performance of this organization. Morale was low, turnover was excruciatingly high, they were losing money. At every turn, everything the board had tried to do, the lessons that all this very talented board had learned in the for-profit world applied to the nonprofit weren't working. They had massive conflict, they weren't communicating, there was high CEO turnover. In fact, just after we began with them, they let this current CEO go. Their growth was stunted and had been stunted for quite some years. Lots of factors here were going into this. Although they had a very talented team, there were competing values at play. And he said, we don't know what to do, but we hear you guys do. It was a joy to be able to work with them and come to a very new place with them after almost a year's worth of work. We want to share with you some of the stories like that through our time with you today in just the 45 minutes we have, and share some theory and some experience and move from root causes, from symptoms to root causes, to help you understand how you can understand that sometimes simple solutions just aren't enough when it comes to these areas that you see on the screen and a whole host of others. Megan, do you want to dive in a little bit to tell us a little theory so we can have some underpinning, some academic underpinning to what we're going to talk about today?
Yes, so to explain a little bit of this from the theoretical perspective, as Dr. Goodwin has said here, I'm going to go through the process of an organizational diagnosis with a theoretical framework. So first, I want to explain, what are we talking about? What is an organizational diagnosis? And we describe this as a process of assessing an organization to really diagnose and understand where it is currently and identify areas of change, areas of needed improvement. And so really diagnosing their current state and then helping them to improve from that state. And we look at organizations at three different levels when we're diagnosing them in this way. So we consider the organization level. This is the broadest perspective of the organization and its systems, its structure, its culture overall. We assess and diagnose at the group level. So this is with specific areas of the organization, specific teams, and how they're functioning at the group level. And then we even look at the individual level. So are the specific individual roles in the right, with the right makeup, right responsibility level, the right level of feedback, and really look at that individual level as well. And so we're going to walk through a model that breaks down this organizational diagnosis at each of those levels. And this is really an interesting process because this is really at the intersection of the insider perspective and the outsider perspective. When you're bringing in a consultant to do this diagnosis for you, this is not just our team coming in and diagnosing very objectively without getting involved. It's very interactive and collaborative with our clients, so that the insider perspective and knowledge and expertise of the organization is aligned and really complemented with the organization development expertise that a team like ours brings to an organization. So now for theory here. So a lot of this is based in organization development literature and research, and it really starts with the open systems model from Daniel Katz. And this model really emphasizes at the core that organizations exist in an environment that is impacting them. And so this model explains that there are inputs from the environment that are then processed and transformed by the organization, and then outputs are then let out into the world by the services that the organization provides, the goods that they're delivering, and the ideas that they are producing and sharing with the world. And so this really underlines again that the environment is really important and crucial to the organization, and that the feedback loop here at the bottom really connects these different areas. So we have information, energy, and different inputs. We really focus here a lot on the people systems rather than the technical systems, especially when we're looking through the lens of organization development at these organizations. So what's the information, energy, people inputs? How are those people then processing them in the organization? And then what are the outputs? And so, of course, the quality of the inputs, the quality of the process and transformation will impact the outputs. So when we diagnose organizations, we start to look at these different components to help them understand why the outputs might look the way that they do.
And I would add, Megan, that feedback on that bottom piece is also one of those places that often gets clogged, as we might put it, and impairs this open system and impairs the health of the organization when feedback isn't looping back and forth in a constant motion within the system. So this is a sociological model that helps understand what organizations are from the people side of things.
Definitely. Thank you for adding that. Yes, the feedback is really important, and we find it's interesting sometimes when we're facilitating this process. That's the only time that they're getting this feedback in a while. So maybe the organization hasn't monitored that feedback very well or very consistently. And so even the process of bringing in consultants to do interviews and interact with staff, do surveys, that we're starting that feedback loop in a way that an area that might have been neglected prior. So to apply this model to our different levels of organization diagnosis, I'm going to start with the highest level, the broadest level of the organization. So at the organization level, we have this application of the diagnostic model from the open source model that we were just discussing. So when we look at the organization level, this is really the broadest part of the environment that are the inputs, and the design components also are pretty broad. So we have the organization strategy, we have technology systems, human resource systems, management processes, the organization structure, all of these really broad things that impact the entire organization at every level. And the organization's culture as well is another one of these design components. So we go in and assess these different areas to see how the organization is doing in each of these design components and transformations, to then see what the impact is on the organization effectiveness. Because often organizations might be able to identify the level of effectiveness themselves. So maybe that the organization is not performing at the highest level, there's a lack of productivity, there's a lack of satisfaction from stakeholders or from staff members, and so they can identify the output. And so we help them to go back in this middle section here and understand how the structure internally might be part of the issue. There might be communication problems and lack of information sharing because the structure hasn't been realigned well. Or there might be a low morale or dissatisfaction when human resource systems aren't in place or aren't equitable in the organization as well. And so we really go in and diagnose what at this level, really across the organization.
And I would just add to that, Megan, oftentimes leaders feel like there's something wrong, and so we'll go do a strategic plan, or we'll do some structure pieces, but they don't see it as a whole systemic whole, this whole input, designed outputs, this whole piece, and how it affects the whole. So one of the things that we want to encourage you to think about when you think about your own systems is see the whole and the part and the whole, back and forth in a consistent dialectic when you think about an intervention.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we can identify certain areas, so then we focus on those specific areas. But really, this organization is an entire system with all these different moving parts, and so we need to consider them all. And though the feedback loop is not presented on this slide again, we also want to make sure that the feedback loop continues throughout this process as well. All right, then zooming in slightly to the next level, we have the group level diagnostic model. So you can see that some of the specificity in each of the areas might be a little similar, but they get more focused to a group or team level in an organization. So this at the group level, the organization's design is now one of the inputs. So the environment is more specific to this organization. The organization's culture is a part of the environment that's influencing each group. And then the group's subculture is also an input here at the group level. Then in the design components and transformations here in the middle, you see that at the group level, goal clarity for alignment around what this group is supposed to be accomplishing, the level of team functioning, if there's a lot of conflict, if there's a lot of collaboration, all of that is now going to be a transformation in the design component for that group. We look at task structure for that specific group. We look at the composition. So who makes up this team? Are there the right people? Is it the right composition? And then the group norms and the accountability to those norms are also another area of this in the design component. So as similar to the last slide, we internally in our organizations might be able to identify one of these areas that needs tweaking and really zoom in and try to focus and improve. Okay, we don't really have group norms. We need to make some group norms, and we might be able to check off one of the boxes, but we think that often organizations need to go a little deeper to root causes and look at the system as a whole, even at the group level. So this entire group, the reason why they have not been functioning well together might be the group norms, but it's also influenced by the organization culture and the goal clarity for that group and all of these other aspects on the slide here. And at the team level, we want to highlight too that team effectiveness really looks like the quality of work life for that group, their productivity, their team performance, and the satisfaction of that team as a unit. We often help organizations really at the group level here when we take them through our team optimization process and really focus in on these design components and inputs to make sure there's alignment and clarity across all of these things and ultimately increase those outputs and the quality of them. All right, and then last but not least here, we'll go all the way down to the individual level. So organizations are made up of individuals as much as there are made up of divisions and teams. We have to focus all the way down to each individual that is in the organization. And so now we have some of the same inputs from the group level. So the organization's design, the culture of the organization. Now the group design and the personal characteristics are also part of the environment and input that are influencing the individual's experience and outputs in the organization. So in the design components here, we really look at characteristics from the job characteristics model, so that the individual has skill variety in their role, they have task identity, task significance, that they see that they are making an impact no matter what their specific role is, that they see the impact across the organization or the piece that they make a difference in. There's We look at autonomy for this level as well. How much autonomy does each individual have in how they get their work done? And really, often we have to help encourage people to increase that autonomy and really let organization members shine in their specific areas. And then last but not least, giving and receiving feedback is really critical here at the individual level. And so this is another way that we, again, are looking at all of this through a lens of diagnosis. So we're asking specific questions and really probing to find out the level of how well the organization is doing in all of these different aspects. And at the individual level, just to give a few examples as well, individual effectiveness looks like that individual having satisfaction in their role, that individual performing well, showing up to work, wanting to stay in the organization and be committed to the organization, and really developing as an individual as well. And so that person having leadership development or other areas where they're really improving. And again, if we look at this system-wide, if we have individual level, really strong outputs at the individual level, then it will actually impact the group level and then impact the organization level.
That's excellent. We wanted to give you that theory just so you realize that it's the solutions to the problems that most organizations face are much deeper than the way people try to intervene, right? Just simply try to add a staff member or release a staff member or do a new strategic plan or add a new initiative are almost always insufficient when you're trying to think about this whole system, this complex system of the sociology of a human group of people coming together around a mission. Just to carry forward the story that I began this webinar with, the organization called us, this environmental education organization called us, and we began working very closely with them in what we call a whole system in the room approach, to get people together to talk about the issues in a positive, constructive way so that we begin to release awareness of what's happening in their system. And they began to identify that they didn't have clear values, mission and vision, for example. They began to identify that they weren't sure where this organization was going, or can I hitch my wagon to this as a professional? And where is this going to take me? Although they loved the stated mission of the organization and were committed to it, the way people were being treated inside the organization interpersonally was so painful. It was hard for us as consultants to even hear these stories. Never seen so many tears and frustrations and examples of just absolute irritation on the part of people who just couldn't figure out why this group of very talented people couldn't come to work together to be as successful as they should have. So they could identify the symptoms, but they didn't have the cause and a theoretical understanding to put all that into a box, to understand how do we move from symptoms to root causes. And that's really the key that we want to help to try to emphasize here on this next slide for you to think about, is moving from the symptoms that you see on the organizational level or the group level or the individual level, and then moving to thinking about systemically what's going on 2-3 levels below this. So for example, you may say, well, we've got a clear lack of goals and direction. Well, let's just solve that. We'll have a retreat and we'll just get some clear goals and some direction. However, there may be lots of assumptions, mental models, behavioral patterns from the past that may be interfering with that ability to do that. And that was what was going on with this nonprofit in the Mountain West, is some of these deep, long-standing beliefs from the past were interfering on all 3 of these levels from them being successful. And until we were able to come with them and talk with them and educate them about this and elucidate these things, they had never really kind of realized, oh, it's much deeper than what we thought it was. So the key here is to be thinking about systemically what's happening. These symptoms are simply symptoms. My brother is a family practice doc, and what he knows as a physician is never treat symptoms. You always look for root causes. What's causing these symptoms? If he comes in and just gives you a Band-Aid and some cough medicine, it hasn't really helped you very much to figure out what's really happening with your body. So in the same kind of way, we apply that same principle of diagnostics to sociology of organizations. How can we figure out what's going on down deep below? So you see things like silos between departments, and you can start to wonder what's really happening here and what's causing that. Why do we have low productivity when we got such smart, talented, dedicated people? Why is there poor communication or underperforming teams or high employee turnover or low morale? And when you start to see a confluence of these symptoms start to happen, oftentimes what can happen is the organization becomes really significantly dysfunctional. If that's not attended to, it can become quite toxic. And unfortunately, we see far too many toxic organizations, which we would define as people are really getting hurt in this place. Feelings hurt, careers are hurt, people feel depressed, demoralized, leave, change professions. There's lots of toxic organizations out there that do that to employees routinely. That's unfortunate and unnecessary. So we move to a process of diagnosis. Megan, you want to talk about this a bit?
Yeah, so when we come in and we're practically doing this with clients, we want to explain a little bit of what this looks like. So this process, as I said at the beginning, is a collaborative process both with the organization and the organization development practitioners or consultants that you've brought in. And really, in order to apply this model and identify those symptoms and then eventually root causes that we've started to talk about, we first have to come in and collect data. So we come in as objective observers and really interact with the organization by reviewing what we call artifacts. So any documented history of the organization chart, the values, mission, and vision, their previous strategic plans. And we try to understand the organization first from what they put on their website and what they put in writing and in documents. Then we do a number of interviews with organization members to ask them really focused questions to address and understand areas of the diagnostic model that we've talked about so far. So we try to really zoom in and ask individuals one-on-one, what's your perspective on each of these areas? Then we code that data and then bring it into the next phase here. But in addition to interviews, we do a lot of qualitative interviews to really get to know the people and read between the lines. We also do a number of quantitative surveys. So we will collect feedback from a broader number of people on these same topics, just for cases when we can't interview as many people as we might hope to. And then often we'll do focus groups as well, where this is really just a joint interview and a group process to start to dissect each of these areas and really diagnose the organization. So once we've collected all of this data, then our team takes it and we do analysis. So we identify some themes. Okay, we heard over and over again that communication is a huge challenge here, and the reasons might be X, Y, and Z. And so we bring that together in a number of themes, and we really flag the big challenges that have come out of that data collection phase. And often they might look like what was on the previous slide. So we might see, okay, we have silos between these departments, we have high turnover in this area, and that's part of our analysis.
Right.
Then
And when you as leaders are doing the listening and the identification and the interviews and so forth, you certainly can do that, and really be listening to what's not being said sometimes. Sometimes when you bring up Ted's name and no one will talk about Ted, well, that's also data, right? Or you realize that people are doing what we call maladaptive processes. Instead of going to my boss, I go end around my boss and I go to my boss's boss. You want to listen for some of these dysfunctions that aren't the way things were drawn up to be on the org chart, for example. But sometimes we need to remind you that if things have gotten to a certain extent of dysfunction, having an outside party is really significant. What we find is that people will tell us the real truth because we don't have a dog in the fight. And sometimes they won't tell people inside the organization because they may love you and care about you and they don't want to hurt your feelings. They know how much you love the place. And so sometimes data collection can be challenging from an insider consultant perspective. And you have to think about that and how that's going to best give you the information that you really need to get to the right conclusions and recommendations. Megan?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, we want to emphasize too, a lot of this is really for your learning to go and apply as quickly as you can, and then also maybe flag certain moments in your organization's lifetime when you really need an outsider perspective to come in and do some of this work for you. And part of that too, that our team brings value to is in this drawing conclusion section. So as we've identified, a lot of times you can identify the symptoms and the certain things that you want to flag that, okay, a lot of people are talking about a lack of communication or a lot of conflict in this specific department. And so it might be clear that that's the issue. But we go a step further to really drawing conclusions and identifying root causes for that. So what are the areas of improvement maybe related to that? Also, what are the areas of strength that we need to grow and develop and lean on in order to make change in those areas that are lacking? And the third bullet here, we really make sure we go through a process that we call a dialogic inquiry, because we recognize that we are outsiders when we're consulting with a client.
Exactly.
So we are not the expert on the organization. And so we bring all of these findings and these conclusions that we've made to date to the organization leadership, and we test these ideas. We think that we've heard about these things. We're seeing that maybe the organization culture is not aligned in this way, and we have a dialogue about this to make sure that we're testing our conclusions with the organization's leaders to make sure that we're not seeing something the wrong way, or we're missing a piece that they might know. So then once we go through that process, we end with recommendations and really, again, jointly and collaboratively design these next steps for the organization so that they can really accelerate forward and address these areas that we've diagnosed as maybe having a need for improvement, or really completely in an area of dysfunction, and make sure that these next steps are actionable for the specific organization that we're working in. We make sure that these are very practical, because often, as we talked about with the open systems model, you're working in an environment. So when we're working with a nonprofit, there's a specific environment there that maybe allows them to be free in certain areas and then holds them back in other areas. When we're working with a government department, we have to be very clear around, okay, this might have worked in a nonprofit setting, but this is not going to work in the government setting because of bureaucracy and the rules around how that organization functions. And so we make sure those next steps are tailored in that way.
Yeah. You know, the couple of principles we want to leave you with here today, first of all, from the earlier part of this conversation, is this is a whole system. Sociology of human beings is a system. And to lead with that perspective, that larger perspective, is imperative. The second thing we would leave you with is a good chunk, a majority, maybe 80% of human behavior is driven by our subconscious, not our conscious. And a lot of what happens between people, and the assumptions that we make, and the norms, taboos, models that we build mentally, happen subconsciously underneath our awareness. To tell you a story of that, we were working with a residential care facility some years ago. And again, the board chair called us and said, something's going wrong. We don't know what it is. Can you come and help us figure this out? Within a week, we figured out that this was a significantly dysfunctional, actually toxic organization. And the board fired 10 of the top 12 leaders right off the bat, just decided to clean house, start afresh. That was a board decision. We were barely on the scene. They rehired those 10 positions. And now we are fully engaged, working with the culture. And a month after those 10 new people had begun their work, they were behaving exactly like the people they had replaced. One of the most fascinating things I've ever seen. And what was happening, we were able to identify for the board and the senior leadership, was that the set of assumptions around who we are and how we're supposed to do our work was being subconsciously transmitted through that organization's people system, even into these brand new people. And they had picked this up, though they were not conscious of it, and were operating the same as the previous people. For example, what I mean by that is this. There was an assumption that They said to themselves that we love our residents more than any other organization like it. They served intellectual and developmentally disabled adults. They had a number of homes all around the area. And yet they had let 3 homes go unlicensed because they were able to continue to say to themselves, well, we love them so much. There was a misalignment in their value system that they had not identified without our help that was causing them to struggle so powerfully. We identified that, we saw that, and we went to them and said, what if we reframe this and said, the way that we can prove that we love our residents more than any other organization is by adhering to the highest possible ethical, moral, legal standards. And that made all the difference. And the organization is thriving today. We got to move from symptoms to root causes. When we think about this, we think about 10 primary culture embedding mechanisms in these areas. And we start with this. There's obviously many more culture embedding mechanisms out there. We can talk about all kinds of secondary embedding mechanisms ad nauseum. But these move, as you'll note, from the most visible to the least visible, as if you're looking at an iceberg. Are there clear values, mission, and vision that are driving behavior? In other words, we think of values as identity and mission as destiny. Do we know exactly who we are and exactly where we're going? If not, we're going to have trouble. What kind of language are we using around here? Are we clear about the language that we're using? And is it helpful to what we're doing, or is it not helpful? We see a lot of dysfunction here. What are we measuring? Are we only measuring numbers and teaching people that all that matters around here is the finances? Are we developing leaders, developing teams? How are we developing and sharing power and those power structures, both formal and informal? Now in this level here, we're getting to that subconscious level of things, of assumptions and mental models that we've had. Social control systems. How do we hold people accountable? Gee, Ted, I really appreciate you on the team, but what you said last Thursday at the staff meeting was just out of line, and I wonder if we can talk about that. How do we socially hold each other accountable to behavior that's helpful and useful and professional? What stories get told around here, and are they holding us back? We worked with an organization some years ago that said, we have a whack-a-mole culture. I always laugh about this. What they meant was every time you pop your head up and try to shine a little bit, the CEO would whack you on the head because she wanted to take credit for all the organizational successes. And they were kept playing, quote, old tapes about the past that continually imprisoned them in the past. Even though the new leader was coming in and moving them into a new future, they were stuck playing these old tapes and going, well, you know, it used to be like this, and, you know, here's what's going to happen again. And they were using these old tapes to talk about and sabotage their success. Shared mental models and basic assumptions are the 2 most powerful, well below the level of consciousness that happens in any group. And these are some levels that we really need to work at to really try to get these dysfunctions that we see, these symptoms, are caused by these assumptions being made that go way back that taught us to be successful. Well, the only way we get out of a financial crisis, for example, is that we have to cut all spending. That was an assumption that worked well in the past, but that sometimes gets transmitted into the future that causes the organization from any expenditure of new funds and investing in themselves and in their people, for example. So these are the deeper levels that happen sociologically and subconsciously with people that often drive those symptoms that we see that are holding organizations back from achieving what they really should be. On the next slide, we can see kind of that movement for how we need to link up these symptoms with root causes. So for example, silos between departments. Often there's no shared mental model for what those teams are supposed to do, or there's a poor organization structure, or the power, formal and informal imbalances have happened between those departments. And we need to get deep into the organization's structure, the sociological structure, and tinker with that to cause those departments to work well together. On the group level of underperforming teams, We see that oftentimes there's just not any psychological safety. We can't talk about the real things that are going on, or they're not really clear roles and responsibilities. One of the things we see quite often is we throw a group of people together who are highly talented, wildly successful in previous endeavors, and we just expect them to perform at a high level. That'd be like an NFL football team saying, you know what, let's skip preseason and we don't need the training camp this year. We're just going to right to our first game. Well, they'd be laughed out of the newspaper in their city. They would lose every game. And yet we do the very same thing with our teams at work. Doesn't make any sense. Or imagine you see high employee turnover and low morale. Well, it could be a lot of things here. It could be low accountability. We're letting bullies, treat people and mistreat people in terrible ways. We have no skill in actually resolving conflict and working through conflict interpersonally. It could be we have very unclear performance metrics and measurements, and there's a really disconnect between the individual's goals and their organizational goals. Lots of things could be going on at the root cause level that could be significant and could be causing these symptoms. Megan, you want to say a bit more about some solutions?
Sure. So the last section we want to move to, so we've identified symptoms, we've talked through some root causes and the deeper levels that might be causing these symptoms. So what do we do about all of this? So the final step here is in creating organizational solutions. So the focus in this section and what we really encourage you and our clients to do is first to make sure that there's shared awareness of challenges. And part of this is going through a process like this of diagnosis and then sharing those results with people and explaining and talking through, okay, this is where we are. This is a pretty, sometimes it's a normal organizational challenge. Sometimes it's abnormal, but we need to recognize where we are currently and have shared awareness around this. Kind of a next step to this is the concept of the whole system in the room. So we talk about this often in our webinars and other content, that really the most effective way to mobilize people and to make change and to identify really complex solutions is by bringing everyone involved into the room in this whole system in the room approach, because there's often unintended consequences and different things. When you push on a lever on one side, it's going to change something in another department or in another area. And when you have the whole system in the room, they can talk through these and really come up with a solution together, because we really like to say that complex problems require complex solutions. And while some of these problems we've been talking about today might look simple on paper, they're very complex and they're all involving people. And so they require complex solutions. So we really suggest that a lot of this, both identifying the solutions and then implementing them, really involve a lot of people in a very strategic way. In the third bullet here too, we really emphasize that we not only want people to be aware of the challenges and to wrestle with them together in a room, we also want there to be shared ownership of not only the solution. Often we bring people together and they can say, okay, yeah, we all came up with this solution, like we did it. We also have to have shared ownership of the problem and how we have gotten to where we are and how we might have contributed, so that we can make sure we don't repeat those same mistakes in the future. And the last bullet here, we really want to make sure our solutions and intervention are focused at the deepest sociological level of culture. And so this really comes in when we're focused on root causes and really deep understanding of basic assumptions, as Dr. Goodwin went through, of the shared mental model of the organization and addressing things at that level, while also then addressing at the high level, the visible level of maybe recreating your values, mission, and vision statement, but making sure that we're doing both things at the highest level and the deepest level of that culture that we can see. And we really make sure and want you, when you're coming up with some of your own solutions, to think through how to really tailor the solution to your specific environment. How can we learn from best practice and then apply it to our specific environment, to considering the entire system that we've been talking about through this entire presentation. And so to close here, Dr. Goodwin, can you share a little bit about where this client you've been talking about is now?
Yeah, so it was really quite dramatic. I actually said in the beginning of the consult, this was the most dysfunctional and toxic organization I had seen in 5 or 10 years. And they recognized they were in such pain. And I said to them, before you call your next CEO, you're going to need to kind of take a broom and sweep the house and do a lot of work here. It's going to take some time. You can't just push through and a couple of solutions and quickly hire and get to success. Before you set up that new CEO for success, we need to do some work here in the culture and the system. So we developed some new board systems, and we helped them think about the board's role and responsibility as a governing board. We did a lot of work with teams and team formation within the structure of the organization, helping them to identify team purpose and composition. We helped them identify psychological safety and how to create psychological safety. We helped them teach them new skills on that, to talk to each other at a deep level, and really restructured their organization and how it flowed with information and feedback systems. Recall that early open systems theory of how do you listen for what we call people addressing ideas, addressing issues and advancing ideas, the 2 AIs I think of them as. And is a continuous feedback loop of ideas are coming up and issues are coming up, and then the teams are coming back and saying, we heard you and we did this with your ideas or the issues. So the system was getting that constant feedback of how to dial in success and healthy sociology. We worked with them to get new job classifications. We had some partners on the HR side, but we worked with them cohesively on that. And we helped a lot of individuals through coaching personally grow. We think of this as polarity management, individual growth and team growth. They have to go hand in glove, working simultaneously, so that you could advance individuals' professional leadership and management skill and communication skill, so they could do that same on the team level as well, and then finally at the organizational level. And we elucidated for them the need to create a shared vision. It was not apparent to them that they weren't all on the same page about where they were going. And so as they began to think about that, they began to really realize we need a concerted effort to come together to decide, where are we going? What difference do we want to make in the world? And that's going to ignite new donors and new funding sources and really excite the world around the work that they're trying to do, the important work that they're trying to do. So they are vastly healthier now than they've been in years, and are excited about their future now. But it took an intervention to get there. Very much like humans, systems of physiology and other things, we sometimes need to go see our physician and have some surgery, or sometimes have some medication to restructure and get us back to health. So these are some of the things that we've been able to talk to you about. I know we crammed a lot of theory and story into about 45 minutes or so, but wonder if you have any questions, if you want to just put anything in the question and answer feature there in the chat feature, if you have any thoughts or questions. But if not, you can always contact us. We love helping organizations think through these ideas to reach their true mission potential. And it's our pleasure to always be able to do that and help organizations succeed. One of the things that motivates us powerfully is we just dislike very much when people sit on Sunday afternoon sick to their stomach thinking about, gee, I got to go to work tomorrow, or I got to go deal with that boss that I can't stand, or that culture that doesn't pay attention to me. Those things can be fixed, and we can learn and grow and help organizations really truly achieve their full and true potential. Any thoughts, questions, Megan, that you would add to this?
I'll just add thank you for your attendance and time this morning. We appreciate it and hope that you learned something and this sparked some interesting thoughts and maybe something you can take back to your team today.
And this will be followed up with an email with the PowerPoint slides. You'll get them as a PDF and as a link to the recording as well. So thank you all very much for joining us. We wish you the very best. Have a great weekend. All right, take care.